Hello friends and sci-fi enthusiasts. I welcome you all alike. To the uninitiated, my name is Chase Randolph. I'm a science fiction author, a lover of all things science-y. In the background, this PC version of the classic tabletop game BattleTech is one of the big reasons why I started writing. It was a big influence on my writing. My book, The Descendant, is an upcoming release in the end of September. And while not necessarily relevant to the book, I am here to explain some common topics, concepts, and tropes within the realm of science fiction and futurism. Specifically, how they're possible with current technology, or what kind of advancements we need to get there, and how that is relevant to you. That way, if you read my book, or other books that fall under the blanket category of classic or hard sci-fi, you will better understand what these things are when you find them in context, or be able to realize what they are when they are described in specific terms by the author and not referred to by these specific names. So if you're new here, please subscribe if you'd like to see more of this kind of content in the future, or to help you find my previous videos. I also encourage, maybe even beg, for comments about any and every science or sci-fi related topic. The more we discuss, the more we both may learn. A simple like is nice too, as I'm struggling for exposure as a new author, here on YouTube trying to promote my book. Today, I'm going to briefly explain what Dyson Spheres are, compare them to Dyson Swarms, as well as talk about O'Neill cylinders and briefly shell worlds. After mentioning these things in my previous video, where I used some economic logic to come to a slightly controversial conclusion that humanity, as a species, should not bother pursuing the galactic speed limit of light speed, or trying to send people to other solar systems or other such massive colonization type efforts, and instead we should stay here in our local system and build massive complexes of habitats and satellites. Some of the most common and efficient types of these habitats are, the structures I named above, named after the men who developed the concept for them. And I figure it is best if I explain what these things are for those who may be unaware to these general types of megastructures and habitats that are commonly used in science fiction, especially in some of the more classic and or technically inclined works of science fiction. For lack of a better idea, I will approach this explanation in alphabetical order, starting with the Dyson Sphere and the closely related Dyson Swarm, which, to be honest, the construction of a Dyson Swarm would be much more practical than a true Dyson Sphere. I hope that'll be evident once I explain what they are and the differences between them. A Dyson Sphere is a concept popularized by Freeman Dyson in a 1960 research paper titled The Search for Artificial Stellar Sources of Infrared Radiation, hence the name Dyson Sphere. Though the idea was originally used in the mid to late 30s by different authors, the idea is, as civilization grows, so does its demand for power. Eventually, that demand for power will grow so large that the power of which even a single planet, whatever planet they're occupying, wherever, they climbed out of the primordial ooze, in our case, Earth, all the power from that one planet would no longer be sufficient to support them. In terms of power, our star, the sun, makes a staggering amount of power, but only a tiny fraction of that radiation reaches Earth. As hot as it may get on some days, the Earth only collects power from the sun's rays that actually land on Earth, which is a tiny speck in space compared to the sun, while there is additional rays leaving the sun in any and all directions at the same time. Many, many times more power than we receive is just getting dumped out there into the empty vacuum of space. In order to take advantage of that massive power output, to collect all those rays, a more advanced civilization than humanity would logically build something akin to a Dyson Sphere, which, to put in layman's terms, is just a giant sphere made of solar panels that encompasses the entire star. therefore collecting every possible scrap of energy that star is producing. A big network of solar panels. It's literally as simple as that. Now, whether you simply entomb the star in those solar panels or the entire solar system is a different matter. If you find a star with no major resources or habitable planets around it, and face it, as I use more of these megastructures, any planet, or as I explain more of these megastructures, any planet could be a useful and habitable planet. I can talk, excuse me. Because all we really need is use of the gravity that they provide us. Anyway, this star that has no major resources in its orbit can be directly enshrined in close proximity with solar panels, and every measurable scrap of its output energy, every conceivable form, is usable by whoever is building that specific Dyson sphere. Hopefully, humanity. And even if that star goes dark for the rest of the galaxy, its output, its power, can be siphoned off and sent wherever it's needed. Long-distance transportation of that type and magnitude of power is an entirely different undertaking and topic for a different time if someone wishes for me to go there. On the other hand, if you were building such a device for our benefit based here in our home system, we would have to build a Dyson sphere so large it not only encompassed the star at the heart of the solar system, but rather the entire solar system. Which is an even bigger undertaking, and I know, don't get me wrong here. But it's not as difficult as you might think. We wouldn't need any special materials or tools or transports we couldn't already build at this moment. The only problem for us is the economic cost and the sheer volume of materials needed. That's what's making it prohibitive. Not the technology, not the physics, just the cost. It's not that we can't. It's just not worth the effort. Yet. A Dyson swarm, like I mentioned earlier, is very similar to a Dyson sphere. But rather than a massive continuous shell around the star in question, it is a latticework, a networked array of satellites with their own solar panels or whatever type of radiation you're choosing to absorb in order to produce power, which I feel like is a more practical use of things. If individual units become inoperable, it is easier to replace them without disturbing the other units and interrupting their production, as well as leaving space between the units for probes and ships and resources to transit. If you built a true solid Dyson sphere, there would be no way in, no way out, unless you built some sort of spaceship-sized door, which is going to increase cost, take up space, and limit what can pass through it to a certain size and requirement, and a schedule depending on how busy the traffic is. It just adds a whole nother level of complication that simply doesn't exist with the use of a swarm. And a swarm can be built in layers, so that you have the same total surface area and absorption rate as a perfect sphere. For example, a layer of satellites between Earth and Venus. Just outside of Mars have another layer, and then another layer out near Pluto or Neptune or something. That way it absorbs just as much from the sun as a true Dyson sphere would. Either way, it's a colossal undertaking, but the amount of power that we could harvest if we built such a thing, well, that involves numbers so large that it's incomprehensible to the human mind. I would just be listing, 1.30000000, and nobody wants to listen to that. The second megastructure on this list, in question, is the O'Neill cylinder, which is also rather simple to build, I dare say. If you built a heck of a lot of them, they could be used as the basis for the aforementioned Dyson swarm. A Dyson swarm of O'Neill cylinders, and that's a heck of a lot of living space. In space. I should write that down somewhere. Give me a second. Anyway. An O'Neill cylinder is named after the physicist Gerard K. O'Neill, who developed the idea in his 1976 book, The High Frontier: Human Colonies in Space. He proposed building these colonies in the 21st century. To explain it briefly, an O'Neill cylinder is a giant rotating tube. The outside of the tube may be covered in solar panels and or have windows to let in natural starlight, whatever the system needs. The tube is then rotated on its longest axis, and the inside of the tube is used as living space. The hollow volume inside. The rotation creates artificial gravity through centrifugal motion and allows people and plants and construction on the inside surfaces of the structure. This is one of the structures being most seriously considered for construction and habitation by the scientific community, with new developments in the design. Steps towards a working model were made in 2014, and it's still on the table. As well as even Jeff Bezos in a 2019 summit suggested building such things for colonization rather than trying to colonize other planets. And in this one specific instance, I must agree with Jeff Bezos. The environment inside the cylinder is completely artificial and can be made and tailored specifically to the human's needs, rather than struggling to survive and or waiting to terraform the surface of Mars. Again, they don't require any materials or sciences we don't already have to build. It's simply a question of providing the funding and manpower and starting to put mass in orbit for this purpose. Some of the recent suggestions involve using the proposed and near-future moon base as an assembly point for these types of structures. So, these O'Neill cylinders may be coming sooner rather than later. In my lifetime, at least. I hope. An example of an O'Neill cylinder-type structure would be the Divine Rings from the Halo video game franchise. These are, as their name implies, giant rings. But the concept is the same. They are round, and they rotate, with habitable space coating the inside of the rings, with breathable atmosphere, plants, rocks, fauna, and gravity due to the rings' rotations. An O'Neill cylinder is simply a stack of these rings, a tube. Diameters from only a couple hundred of meters to massive constructions kilometers in diameter are all practical and each have their own upsides and downfalls. Lastly, I want to touch on the idea of shell worlds, which is kind of like building a Dyson Sphere, but instead of building it around a star to absorb its energy, you build it to encapsulate a planet, using the planet's natural gravity to provide gravity and stabilization to the shell structure around it, which would probably have to be built out of many concentric and connected spinning rings for strength, stability, and mutual integrity between the rings. But this creates massive amounts of new living space, and if truly enshrined, the host planet can be illuminated. You put lights on the insides of the rings and let them shine down on the planet, and this allows continued habitation and cultivation of the planet's surface below the shell. And again, this would be fantastic to build around uninhabited planets like Mars. We could build a couple rings around Mars, live on the rings, cultivate the Martian soil for our crops, have tons of living space, and a whole planet's worth of farmland. This would be a lot more complicated than building an O'Neill cylinder, but would also be much larger and more rewarding. It's a whole different scale we're working with there. But again, these types of structures don't take any new technology or major developments in physics from where we sit right now. It's simply economically prohibitive. However, any of these three methods is exponentially cheaper than the massive energy costs of moving a small amount of mass at a significant fraction of the speed of light to a planet in a different solar system that we probably won't be able to inhabit and will be far away from us for it to receive aid from us, or far enough away from us that the colony, we wouldn't be able to receive goods from it, if they managed to produce anything, and they wouldn't be able to receive goods from us in order for Earth to help sustain them in the early stages of the colonization process. So, while whimsical and makes for good storytelling, the pursuit of faster-than-light travel and interstellar colonization is, in my opinion, a fruitless endeavor, and an effort which would be much better spent on the aforementioned structures or things like them here in our own system, hollowing out asteroids and dropping O'Neill cylinders inside of them, using the rock as a shield from harmful radiation and insulation from damage, or just as insulation, so the heat inside the cylinder stays hot. or cold, depending on, if you're in direct sunlight or not. But I digress. There's lots of videos that delve into this topic deeper and more detailed than I can or will here. I'll put links to them in the description of this video and let them explain the structures and economic and technical complexities of building these structures and of interstellar colonization, and you can decide which you like for yourself. They're much deeper and more interesting and sciencey and detail-oriented, and they're long. But if details and being very sciencey is your thing, I mean, it's my thing, then go look them up. I'll leave links in the description. Speaking of my thing, I'll have some new content to share soon. As I mentioned, my book is releasing in the end of September. As part of that release, I have written a 4-part series of vignettes. They're closely related to the book. They're kind of their own story, and they might not make a ton of sense, but that's intentional. They will make sense in context of the book. They're going to be available to read for free through my publisher's website. I will include links to that as well down in the video description. They're not out yet, but they will be posted every 2 weeks through August and September. They'll be out soon, and will continue to be out every 2 weeks up until the book release at the end of September. I implore you, please give them a look. They'll be a quick and exciting read. Anyway, now that I've done my shameless plug, thanks for listening to my brief, layman's explanation of some of the common megastructures in science fiction. I hope you enjoyed my Battletech gameplay in the background as much as I enjoyed playing it. I hope you learned something, maybe sparked your interest and let you look into this type of massive stellar scale engineering and megastructures. If you learned something, please leave a like, or don't, or leave a like if you didn't learn something. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, where I plan to touch on other major science topics. I'm going to cover a couple more videos up until the book release: string theory, artificial intelligence, that kind of stuff. And string theory specifically, I would like to know more about myself, as it does play a significant part in my books. Not in the current book that's being released, but there's other books that are written and more books to be written, and string theory plays a significant part as the story develops. That will also take more research on my part, but hopefully there won't be such a delay between science videos as there has been recently. I apologize, I have been busy with some of my PC gaming and the friends I've made there, and working with the publisher and book stuff and organizing and decision making and cover art, and I'm publishing a book. I mean, that's exciting. Also, I have been making other videos, even if they haven't been directly science related. I play Squad, a slow-paced, strategic 40 versus 40 first-person shooter. And if you play Squad or are just interested in looking at some highlights, feel free to look at my other videos too. Thank you for your time. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in orbit. I'm going to finish this fight real quick. See how fast I can take out these guys. I mean, I've got an Atlas.
Line 'em up and I'll shoot 'em down, Commander.
Good job. Objective secure.
Alright. Those guys escaped. Objective completed. See you guys on the other side. I'm going to finish this fight.